Tonight's program is Saudi Arabia's Strategic Transformation, Regional Power, and Global Influence. For those of you who have never been to a World Affairs Council event, please raise your hand. Okay. Some new folks. Well, the World Affairs Council of Atlanta is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization established in 2010 by Atlanta's foremost corporate and civic leaders. Our mission is to equip Atlantans with the knowledge, global connections, and international perspective needed to lead in today's interconnected world. Through dozens of high-caliber events each year, we convene business executives, diplomats, students, and engaged citizens to explore and address the most pressing global issues of our time. So thank you for being with us here tonight. The World Affairs Council is led by a dedicated board of directors who represent some of Atlanta's most prominent corporate and civic organizations that are making an impact on the world. And we do have a board director tonight. So please join me in welcoming to the podium, Sam Owens.
Thank you, Ricky. So it's a pleasure to be here. And in addition to all those great civic and business leaders, I'm an attorney. So you get a little bit of everything, right? So I'm Sam again. So on behalf of the board, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the council. It's a pleasure to welcome this great and timely program. Tonight's program features two great world-class experts, promises to be informative, thought-provoking, and that was even before the event, so the last couple of days in Egypt. As Ricky said, we in Atlanta need an organization that's going to help us learn more about what's happening in the world and to be able to assess better what's happening in the world. And this is a great program for that. Our firm, and along with many other businesses, invest in the council to bring world-class expertise to Atlanta because Atlanta deserves it. I want to thank you for coming, and I want you to enjoy the program. I'm sure Ricky will do a great job moderating as usual. And God, how timely could this program be?
I know.
So thank you, Ricky.
Thank you. Well, I am going to rely on the audience to ask all of those timely questions. I'm sure that you have many, and we have two of the best experts to answer your questions here. So a little housekeeping. This program is on the record. The statements made today are those of the speaker, not of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. And as Sam mentioned, tonight's discussion is timely and essential as the world shifts toward a multipolar era. I know not everybody likes that term, but it really captures what you feel like we're going through right now. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is redefining its position both in the Middle East as well as on the global stage. Vision 2030 is one of the most ambitious national transformation strategies in modern history. The kingdom has made it its mission to reimagine its economy, culture, and international partnerships. So over the course of this evening, we will explore the strategic drivers behind the kingdom's realignment and the national leader, of course, who is leading that change, the evolving relationships with global powers like the US, China, and Russia, the role of energy diplomacy, sovereign investment, and cultural outreach, and the broader implications for regional stability and global power dynamics. For decades, Saudi Arabia's role on the world stage was defined largely by its energy wealth and alliance with the West. The kingdom is estimated to control 20% of the world's proven oil reserves. The goal of Vision 2030 is to shift from an oil-reliant economy to a diversified global player in investment, technology, tourism, and culture. The 65% of Saudi citizens who are under the age of 30 are growing up in a society that's unrecognizable to their parents. And this evening, we are honored to host two extraordinary thought leaders who will help us unpack this transformation and its implications for the region, the US, and the world. Karen Elliott House is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist with nearly 5 decades of experience covering Saudi Arabia. Her deep expertise informs her latest book, The Man Who Would Be King, Mohammed bin Salman and the Transformation of Saudi Arabia, which draws on more than a half dozen in-depth interviews with the Crown Prince himself. House spent over 30 years at the Wall Street Journal, serving as a reporter, editor, and ultimately publisher. She's also author of On Saudi Arabia, Its People, Past, Religion, Fault Lines, and Future. She resides in Princeton, New Jersey. Fahad Nazer was appointed spokesperson for the Embassy of Saudi Arabia to the United States on January 18th, 2019. An international fellow at the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, Nazer is an experienced political analyst with recognized expertise on political, social, and economic developments in Saudi Arabia. Nazer is a frequent columnist for the daily newspaper Arab News, and his publications have appeared in Foreign Affairs, the New York Times, CNN, Foreign Policy, Yale Global Online, the National Interest in Newsweek. He is a former non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. Nazer earned his BA in political science from New York University and an MA in political science from St. John's University in New York City. So as we explore issues today, our audience is invited to listen to the insights shared by our expert speakers, allow them to prompt new thinking about this topic, and of course, you will have an opportunity to ask questions after the moderated discussion. So let us begin with opening remarks by Fahad Nazer. Is your mic on?
It's not.
Okay, we'll turn it on.
I'm gonna be using this one.
Does this microphone work?
Yeah, it works, right? Can you hear me? Okay. All right, thank you for the invitation and the introduction, Ricky, and thank you to Sam and the World Affairs Council. I'm privileged and fortunate enough to travel across the United States. And while I'm welcomed and warmly greeted wherever I go, I always look forward to coming to, heading south, because Southern hospitality is the real deal, and I never tire of it. So thank you for being gracious hosts. So let me start by saying that Saudi Arabia is currently undergoing what I would argue is the most consequential transformation in the world. And I use the word consequential because of where Saudi Arabia sits in the international community. As I think most of you probably know, Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam and the location of its two holy sites in Mecca and Medina. And because of that, Muslim majority countries look to Saudi Arabia to play a leadership role in terms of addressing the challenges that the broader Muslim community around the world faces. At the same time, I think there's also an expectation among Arab majority nations for Saudi Arabia to lead. And the reason they're slightly different, it's because of the fact that we are the Arab world's biggest economy. On a third front, there's an expectation among oil-producing nations, as well as oil-consuming nations around the world, for Saudi Arabia to play a central role in making sure that oil markets are stable and adequately supplied. I think to a great extent, we've embraced these expectations and this role, out of the belief that we really believe that we are living in an increasingly interconnected global community, and every country has a role to play in that regard. So the transformation that I'm referring to, and Ricky mentioned it briefly, is something we call Saudi Vision 2030. The vision was unveiled by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince back in 2016. And simply put, the broad objectives of the vision is the empowerment of every segment of Saudi society, as well as the development of every sector of the Saudi economy. For years, our economy was reliant, some would argue too reliant, on oil revenues. And that worked for us for several decades. Just to use that as an example, in 1970, our total population was 5 million people. Last year, we conducted our most comprehensive survey or census, and our population actually crossed 35 million. So that's a six-fold increase in a little over 50 years. So the vision has invested a lot of resources into a number of sectors that we believe will help us diversify our economy. We'll focus just on a few. One of them is our mining sector. And again, last year we conducted what was probably the most thorough geological survey in Saudi Arabia ever conducted. And it found that we have $2.4 trillion worth of metals and minerals that can be explored and developed. And when you develop a sector that is that big, obviously it will generate billions of dollars of revenues, but also generate thousands of jobs. to Saudis of both genders. At the same time, and I hope, I'm sure most of you are aware of where Saudi Arabia sits geographically. We are essentially strategically located at the cross-section of 3 continents, Africa, Europe, and Asia. We're also on 2 major waterways, the Red Sea on the west coast, and what we call the Arabian Gulf on the east side. And because of that, we believe that we are, again, uniquely positioned to try to connect the global north to the global south by helping the transfer of goods and services and information between north and south. I think we are well on our way to becoming a global logistics hub. We are well on our way to becoming a global mining powerhouse. But not just that, we have also become, in a very short period of time, a global tourism destination. So if I believe I have this figure correct, last year we had 100 million tourism visits. Now, if I have to break that number down, even if you remove people who went to Saudi Arabia for religious tourism, still 22 million people came to Saudi Arabia for non-religious tourist reasons. And that's a huge leap for us. Essentially, we've created a tourism sector from the ground up in probably record time. And I believe that we have the second fastest growing tourism sector in the world. In addition to that, we also have some very unique giga projects that are at the forefront of science and technology. I think maybe the most famous of which, or the one that has attracted the most attention, and I think for right reason, is something we call NEOM. And NEOM, again, is a smart city that we're building from the ground up. It is in the northwest of Saudi Arabia. It is approximately the size of Belgium, or since this is an largely American audience, it's also the size of Massachusetts. I believe those 2 territories are the same size, otherwise I have some explaining to do. Again, NEOM is going to have a number of sectors. It's going to have a tech sector, an education sector. The tourism component or sector of NEOM is already up and running. Some of the resorts have already opened their doors last year. In NEOM, we're also building the world's biggest green hydrogen plant in the world, which happens to be a joint venture between a Saudi and an American company. And NEOM, as we speak, has, I believe, 70,000 people working on it. It has a full-time staff of 2,000 people, including dozens of Americans. And I've spoken to the leadership there. And one of the leaders, I think, described it aptly as, he said that NEOM is basically an attempt to demonstrate that human beings can live in complete harmony with nature by employing the most advanced technologies available, which I think is a very cool concept. NEOM is unfolding over several phases. Like I said, the tourism sector is up and running. The construction and manufacturing sector is also, that plant should be up and running in a couple of years. So when all is said and done, I think it will represent a huge leap forward in urban living. At the same time, so as I talk about all these various aspects of Vision 2030, there's no doubt that Vision 2030 is largely a Saudi project, but some of our broader ambitions do require the broader Middle East to enjoy some semblance of peace and prosperity. So for instance, I mean, some of the goals I already mentioned, if we want to become a global tourism destination, we need the broader region to enjoy peace and stability. If we want to enjoy or become a global tourism, or rather logistics hub, again, we need the region to be more stable and more peaceful. Not only that, but Saudi Arabia, and this is also part of Vision 2030, we are leaders on climate change. We have a number of initiatives. We unveiled something called the Saudi Green Initiative back in 2019, and it has a number of programs. Parts of it is that we're investing heavily in renewable energy, primarily solar and wind, but we're also reducing carbon emissions, so we're moving on multiple tracks. Now, as far as I can tell, climate change is maybe the ultimate global challenge. Because you can have the cleanest air and cleanest water in the world, but if your neighbors are not doing likewise, then ultimately that becomes an exercise in futility. So, as I said, we want to make sure to promote peace, trust, and stability in the region. And so in many ways, our foreign policy is meant to complement some of our Vision 2030 goals. And the way we conduct our foreign policy is fairly simple. We adhere strictly to a set of principles that I believe have allowed us to enjoy good, if not excellent, relations with the overwhelming majority of countries around the world. So some of these principles are, we rarely use force. We always use it as a last resort. We're strong believers in multilateral efforts, collective efforts, especially those under the auspices of the United Nations. We are supportive of internationally recognized state institutions. We do not support any non-state militant actors, regardless of their affiliation or their ideology. We're also big believers in the importance of diplomacy, including quiet, behind-the-scenes diplomacy that we believe does a lot of good work. I think we've had a good track record over the years in playing the role of honest broker, sometimes between nations, but also sometimes between factions within nations. This record goes back to 1990, when we helped broker an agreement that brought the Lebanese civil war to an end. That civil war had been raging for 15 years prior to that. More recently, we helped broker an agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia. We've even offered to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. And even more recently, we hosted talks between the United States and Russia that I think by all accounts represented a good start and a productive conversation to resolving some of the issues between the two countries. And I'd like to obviously end, given where we are, by saying a few words about the importance of Saudi Arabia's relationship with the United States. The relationship with the US is longstanding. It goes back 80 years. And not only has it endured for 80 years, it's actually continued to strengthen and to broaden and to deepen under both Republican and Democratic administrations. The relationship in many ways is multidimensional. It includes political cooperation on a number of fronts. It also includes military cooperation, including not just regular joint military training. And I do like to remember my audiences that Saudi Arabia and the United States have fought not one, but two wars side by side. The first was in 1990 when we helped expel the Saddam Hussein's troops from Kuwait. And more recently, again, we worked side by side to expel the terrorist group ISIS from Syria and Iraq. At the same time, there's a very important economic dimension of the relationship. The trade in goods and services between Saudi Arabia last year was valued at approximately $40 billion. And that supports 165,000 jobs right here in the United States, including several thousand jobs in Jordan. These are not my figures, these are US government figures. Last but not least, there's a very important people-to-people dimension of the relationship that is sometimes overlooked. So again, as we speak, there's an estimated 70 to 80,000 Americans living and working in Saudi Arabia, some of whom have lived longer than I did in Saudi Arabia, and for sure, some of whom have seen more of Saudi Arabia than I have. In my defense, I've probably seen more of the United States than most Americans, so that kind of evens out that way. Also, as we speak, there's an estimated 20,000 students, Saudi students studying in the United States. That figure used to be as high as 80,000 about 10 years ago. What's interesting about Saudi students in the US is that while they're here, I think many of them see themselves as unofficial ambassadors. So most of them are obviously their students. They open up Saudi clubs at their various colleges and universities with the hope of introducing Americans to Saudi culture, Saudi values, and just creating bonds. And that's great. And and this is, a grassroots level. This is not something that we necessarily advocate. What's interesting though is that when Saudis by the thousands go back to Saudi Arabia, many of them become your biggest advocates. Because again, most of them have spent at least 4 years in the United States, and their neighbors and peers and classmates essentially become an extended part of their family. And these relationships last sometimes for decades. I know that for a fact because my late father studied in the United States in the 1960s. When he came back as a diplomat to New York in the 1990s, he connected with his host family, and they still remembered him 30 years later, and they met. And so, and this is not an isolated case. There's thousands and thousands of these examples. So just to wrap things up, I think the relationship has been mutually beneficial. And it's endured for many, many reasons. I would argue that it's been good for Saudi Arabia. I'll go a step further and say it's been good for the United States, and it's been good for the peace and prosperity of the Arab world and the broader international community. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And so now we have the pleasure of bringing Karen Elliott House into the conversation remotely. Karen, just to do a quick tech check again, or can you see us and hear us?
He's on mute.
Looks like we can't hear you. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I didn't hear you. What did you say to me, Ricky? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. I just wanted to make sure that we have you, because I'd like to start with you. You have written a book that I have here to show everyone, The Man Who Would Be King, the person who was leading the transformation that Fahad just described. And you have been covering Saudi Arabia for 50 years almost. So could you share, illustrate for our audience who may not really be able to understand how fast things are changing and how disruptive these changes are? Could you start by illustrating what has been happening for roughly the last 10 years?
Yeah, it is. First, I want to say thanks for including me. And Fahad, you did a great job outlining. I can say amen to what you said. In terms of change, I mean, I went there the first time in 1978. So that was before the Mecca Mosque incident and the fall of the Shah. And, you know, people were more, quote, normal. I went to a dinner party at Sheikh Yamani's house, the oil minister, and men and women were mixing. Women were dressed beautifully. There was alcohol. And a few years later, all of that disappeared. And until the crown prince and his father, King Salman, came along. And it is like night and day. It's almost, even though I keep going there constantly, it boggles my mind how rapidly things have changed from, you know, women being basically allowed to be teachers to women doing anything in private sector and government. They're working everywhere. They drive. Many of them still prefer to have a driver because parking in Riyadh is hard. But it's, you know, fancy, fine restaurants. No alcohol yet, but beautiful non-alcoholic fruit drinks. I mean, you can have a great time. And I think tourism is succeeding very well, judging from airline prices to get to Saudi Arabia. Somebody's buying a lot of tickets and pushing up the price, and I think it must be tourists.
And how, this is only the last 10 years, so this started in 2015, these transformations. How has the Mohammed bin Salman and his father been so successful in doing this all so quickly?
I'm sorry, how is he what?
I was just wondering how Mohammed bin Salman and his father have been able to achieve such transformative change so quickly in just 10 years.
They've had the courage to do it. the preceding king, King Abdullah, talked during all of after he became king in 2005, he talked about letting women sell lingerie in stores, and the religious said, no way, you can't do it. So for a woman to sell across the counter to a man, she would go to hell, but, for her to buy across the counter from a man was okay. So, kind of silly things like that, but he did not push. He talked about women driving, or at least maybe female doctors, as a way of opening the door to that. And when the king and his son, Mohammed, came along, I mean, they simply said to the religious police, you can't walk around the streets arresting people, and in essence, invading their privacy and telling a woman she can't wear nail polish, or things like that. And they continued to pay them. So it's the opposite of our government shutdown, where people are working with, in many cases, without being paid. These people were paid, but not allowed to work in terms of arresting people on the streets. And, there were obviously people who didn't like that. And some people would talk to people like me about their displeasure at that. But, nobody, it was accepted. And it was welcomed by a lot of the young, and obviously by women. This group that, as Fahad mentioned, the population, 60+% of Saudis are under 30, and the crown prince is only 40. So he was a part of that young generation that was frustrated by inability to do much of anything growing up. So he understood, and he knew that there was a constituency for it, and the young are his constituency. So he simply did it.
Fahad, what has been your experience of this rapid transformation, and how are everyday Saudis kind of balancing tradition with this rapid change?
Right, so I do go back to the kingdom about typically 4 times a year. And even for me, I'm struck by the pace of the change. And, you see it as soon as the kind of the first piece of evidence that things were changing very quickly in Saudi Arabia. And for people maybe in the room who've been to the kingdom and haven't been in a while, you see it as soon as you land at the airport, because as Karen will probably agree, you see women everywhere. And it's not just at the airport, you go, you travel in the cities, you go to government agencies. So just how much more involved women are, I think is the most obvious change in Saudi Arabia. But it's not, Vision 2030 is about the empowerment of women. That's a big part of it. I would argue that the empowerment of women is both a goal of Vision 2030, but it's also one of the keys to success, because women do represent the majority of Saudis, and I think 52% of our population are women. So that's one thing, but there is one dimension of Vision 2030 that I think people on the outside may not see. You have to be, I think it's mostly Saudi citizens themselves, or people who live in Saudi Arabia, who really appreciate it. And it is the fact that we have completely revolutionized the way we deliver government services. So we have essentially digitized our entire education system, our healthcare system, our legal system. You can, it used to be that if you had any legal issue, you'd have to go to a court and file all sorts of forms, and it would take weeks, if not months. Those days are long over. I had a personal experience a couple of years ago where I needed a power of attorney done. This is prior to my appointment. So I did it the first time 10 years ago. It took me a few weeks, and I was going back and forth to the embassy. I needed to change the dates from Islamic to Gregorian. I needed to change the language, and it was a bit of an arduous process, to be honest. I had to do the same thing 2 years ago, and my uncle and I did it from the comfort of my living room, as I said, the commercials. It took me all of 10 minutes, and all I needed was a smartphone, and it was just a series of text messages, and I was able to grant the same uncle this power of attorney. And so I'm not exaggerating when I say that, procedures that used to take months now take days, and what used to take weeks now takes minutes. I needed a passport issued a couple of years ago. I didn't realize that my passport was almost expired. And I had it issued in 2 days. It would have been 1 day if it wasn't the weekend. So all of these issues, all of these reforms have really made a tangible difference in the everyday lives of people. And we've actually commissioned statisticians to look at how much money was saved by people not spending hours and days and sometimes weeks going to different government agencies to get, paperwork done. I don't have the exact figure for that, but it is in the billions of dollars, certainly over the course of the past 5 years. Because again, it took weeks and months, now literally sometimes takes minutes.
Karen,
Can I just add to that, Ricky? Riyadh is like Seoul in its digital ease. Everything it's a modern, it makes New York City look like a third world country in terms of the way things operate in Riyadh and Seoul versus New York City. Sorry.
no, I think I was just in Seoul, and so as soon as you said that, I knew what you mean. What a beautiful city, especially at night. And Karen, you have many conversations with MBS over the years. What are some of the things that he has shared with you directly about his vision for the kingdom?
Well, as Fahad said, he wants to modernize the country and make it part of the world, a place that welcomes foreigners instead of treating them as invading infidels, a place where they can work and live and be comfortable, have entertainment, good education, good homes, because if you're going to modernize your country, you have to have the help of foreigners, because he's got such big ambitions that he's let women in to help him, but there's still room for other people, and he wants to get rid of what I would call religiosity, not religion. I mean, he wants people to practice their religion, but not push it on other people. So in earlier days, in hotel lobbies, when it was prayer time, everybody would be in the lobby or in the government building praying. And, if you didn't do it or go to the mosque to pray, the religious police shook the stick and said, pray, go pray. And, he wants people to have a respect for religion, but not push it on other people. And he's an admirer of Japan. And, I think his vision of Saudi Arabia is a modern country where it retains some unique Saudi characteristics, the way he believes in. I agree with him that Japan does. Japan is part of the world, but the Japanese have maintained some of their culture in the face of westernization, et cetera. And I think that's what he's looking for, a country that is comfortable and developed, religious, but not, not a big show of religion.
Is that your experience, Fahad?
Yeah, I mean, I agree to a great extent with Karen, and obviously Karen has definitely spent more time with His Royal Highness than I have and wrote an entire book about it.
Mm.
But so I'll just add a couple of things about just my perceptions of the importance of His Royal Highness being in the position that he's in right now. I agree with Karen that certainly His Royal Highness represents a new generation of Saudi leaders. And he's incredibly popular with Saudis in general, but especially with the overwhelming majority of young Saudis. And I think part of the reason is that His Royal Highness speaks with refreshing candor about the challenges of the present. He's also does not shy away from talking candidly about the mistakes of the past. But I think maybe more importantly, His Royal Highness also has speaks with unrivaled enthusiasm about the potential and the future of Saudi Arabia. And I think that enthusiasm is what excites young men and women. And again, I think I consider myself privileged to travel that as often as I do to Saudi Arabia. And I often meet with a lot of young men and women who are overseeing some of these programs. And I can just sense, it's very obvious to me that there's excitement, that there's belief in this project, which is a collective effort. I mean, the vision comes from His Royal Highness and his advisors, but I think we have no doubt that for Vision 2030 to succeed, and it has to a great extent, it's already met some of its benchmarks and exceeded even some of the expectations. But there's also an expectation for everybody to play a role. And so whether you're a government bureaucrat, whether you're a scientist, whether you're an artist, whether you're a business leader, there's a role and there's opportunities like never before. And I've seen it myself. I mean, people, this is hard for me to admit, but who are much younger than me, who've advanced in both the public and private sector very, very quickly. And I think that's a great thing. It's a reflection of the demographic reality of the kingdom. And again, predominantly young population. But there is an expectation that, His Royal Highness, by all accounts, and Karen probably knows this certainly better than I, works as hard as anybody in the kingdom. That's just known about him. Everybody knows that. Incidentally, my own boss, Her Royal Highness Princess Rima, the ambassador to the United States, is also the hardest working person that I know.
Mhm.
So this is kind of the norm. Our leaders now are cut from the same cloth. And His Royal Highness, in one of his, he doesn't speak to the media often, but when he does, it's very compelling, I have to say, because again, he's very candid. He's very
Mhm.
with what he wants, what his goals are, and what the challenges are. In one of his first public speaking engagements, His Royal Highness was asked about the pace of change in the past. And he essentially said that the pace has to be accelerated because we have to make up for the lost time. And the
Mhm.
world that we live in now is just moving at such a rapid clip that the pace of the past is just not, it's not viable, it's not sustainable. We're gonna be left out if we move as slowly as we did in the past. So the pace of change has been fast, but for good reason. And it's been embraced by, again, a predominantly young population who realizes that we are part of this global community. And again, whether you're a scientist or an artist or a business leader, I don't think anyone thinks of just locally anymore. And I see this with business leaders all the time. It can be a mom and pop's shop of some sort in Riyadh or Jeddah, but they're not just looking at their neighborhood or even the city. They're thinking globally right off the bat, as they say. So His Highness realizes that, the people around him realize that, and young Saudi men and women realize that you have to work hard. You're not going to sleep as much as you want, but it's all well worth it in the end.
Can I add to that? To me, the interesting thing about him is how everything you said is true, but how informal, I would say, he is, non-regal. unlike any of the, the princes I met in the past in government positions. The first time I met him, he was just wearing his white thobe. He had his hair pulled back on his head, no, kind of regal bisht around him. And he just shakes hands and says, hi, and then sits down, and you ask a question and he answers. Whereas interviewing his uncles in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't actually have a conversation. They had so many retainers running around the room and getting in the way because I don't think they wanted to impart information. I'm not sure. But he's very approachable. And I think young people like that. And the other interesting thing, in case people in the audience don't know, he is completely educated in Saudi Arabia. But he is, as he wants other Saudis to be, he is a proud Saudi, not with a kind of sense of insecurity of I'm, I'm Prince Mohammed, but just, what you see is what you get. He's very confident, and that I find interesting in someone that was so young as he was and is over these 10 years of change. Excuse me.
Your book is clear, though. This is a complex individual. And it's wonderful to hear the anecdotes about his casualness and approachability. But Fahad mentioned that he's willing to talk about mistakes made in the past. How does he handle when being asked about tough questions, for example, Jamal Khashoggi, or even failures of Vision 2030, which has not all been a perfect success? How does he handle questions like that when you put those to him?
I mean, basically, whatever one asks, he answers, as Fahad said, candidly. I mean, on Khashoggi, he's obviously not interested in talking about it, and he has said, I have to take responsibility because I was in charge at the time, but I had nothing to do with it. But, the only question I've ever asked him that he didn't answer was, I asked him once, describe yourself, because I was very curious what he would say. And he said, I can't. And I asked him once, because I'm intrigued by, I read history and I'm intrigued by other autocratic leaders. And so I asked him, Caesar Augustus said that I found Rome in clay and I left it in marble. And that was his sort of legacy and epitaph. And I said, what would you like yours to be? And he thought for a moment, and then he said, I found Saudi Arabia in essence in good shape, and I inspired the young to leave it better. But he doesn't like people to say that he's a one-man show. He says that people say that as a way of trying to cripple or denigrate him. That, there have been other modernizers in the history of Saudi Arabia, and he gives, King Faisal credit, as he deserves, for education and creating institutions in the kingdom. But I think, he is a Saudi leader, I would say, unlike no other except his grandfather, who put the country together after a 20, 30 years civil war among tribes to control everybody and create the kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
If I can just address a couple of your questions, Ricky. And so Vision 2030 was always, from the start, is meant to be a long-term project. Now, it does have an end date in theory, but we're certainly not planning to stop at 2030. And it has many different components, and from the beginning, the understanding has always been that it will undergo constant, continuous evaluation. And I think we were reasonable in assuming that some of the programs would move on schedule, some would move ahead of schedule, and many had, but that some may lag behind, and that's fine, because again, when you're trying to transform an entire country, create entire sectors from the ground up, it's not all gonna move at the same pace. So, and we're perfectly fine with that. But just to cite a couple of examples, one of the goals of Vision 2030 was to increase the percentage of women in the labor force. In 2016, I think 20% was the figure at the time. The goal was 30% by 2030. We are at 36% today. And so that benchmark, that goal has already been moved upwards. Home ownership, there's been similar benchmarks to home ownership, and those have been moved up. Unemployment has gone down faster than what we initially wanted, which is a great thing. So we've set that benchmark a little lower. There's many examples like that, but we also came to terms and expected that there would be challenges along the way. Now you mentioned the Jamal Khashoggi incident. We've addressed it many times, but I'll address it again, since you mentioned it. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi was a heinous crime. Not only was it an egregious violation of our laws, but it was also an affront to our values. It is not who we are as a people. And I invite anyone to read about Saudi Arabia's history. You're not going to find an incident that is similar to that. It is simply not who we are. It is not how we resolve our differences. At the same time, the people who were responsible for it were arrested and prosecuted, and were doing, lengthy prison sentences. So it's something that we have to deal with. But again, if anybody in this room is aware of a country that doesn't have its dark chapters, please let me know. I'd be curious.
You mentioned unemployment and getting women involved in the workforce, and that was one of my major questions was, when you're transforming a society, that's one thing. When you're transforming an economy, how have the education systems, the workforce training systems, and that's an immense mobilization. I mean, here in the US, we talk about it all the time, workforce training. Manufacturers don't get the labor they need, skilled labor. The US has never been able to crack that. So what are you all, or MBS doing and Saudi Arabia doing to make sure you all have the workforce and the education system to build the economy of Vision 2030?
Well, we've long believed that you cannot build a solid foundation without a proper education. And I think the other element of it is healthcare. So year in, year out, and this has been going on for quite a while, we are spending well over 20% of our annual budget on education, and another 22% on healthcare. The amount of investment has accelerated in recent years. Again, out of the belief that that is the foundation of any society. So not only have we built a lot of new universities and colleges, we're also building schools all across Saudi Arabia. We're building new hospitals. We've digitized, I think I already mentioned, digitized the healthcare system. We want to make sure that it's as accessible as possible. We are spending and investing in vocational training, because as every country realizes, a four-year degree is not necessarily the right fit for every young person. There's room for vocational training and technical training. So we're investing on all of these fronts with the understanding that, we need to generate jobs. We're building again sectors from the ground up. And we want to make sure that as many of these sectors and jobs are performed by Saudis. At the same time, as Karen said, we still have and are welcoming of, experts from all over the world. Whether you are a blue collar worker or a network engineer, there's a place for you in Saudi Arabia. And again, I think I referenced the census that was conducted last year in the kingdom. And so our total population is 35 million, but 14 million of whom are non-Saudis. And I think that's an important figure because not only does it corroborate what I'm saying in the sense that we want people with know-how and expertise and experience to help us move this very exciting stage of our development forward. But I think, and maybe Karen will agree with me, and I know certainly being in the South, and I know that people in the South take hospitality very seriously, but I think we take it seriously as well. I think it is consistent with our faith, to be honest, but certainly with our Arab values and culture, that if you come to our hometown, you're going to be treated like family. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. There's dozens of clips of tourists from all over the world, including Americans, who again have seen and traveled across Saudi Arabia. And locals stop them. The locals know they're not locals; they're from out of town, and they insist that they go home with them and that they share at least, if not dinner or lunch, tea or coffee, out of the sense. Really, I think it's a sense of appreciation for people who've come a long way. It's obviously a long flight. I've done it many, many times to travel from the United States to the kingdom. But if somebody spends those 11 hours to travel to Saudi Arabia, and I've been privileged to travel with many delegations of Americans, think tankers, former ambassadors, former military leaders, sometimes religious leaders. And I'm yet to meet, there's probably a few hundred people with whom I've traveled over the years. And every person I've traveled with, they usually are grateful for the experience, because being in Saudi Arabia changes your perception about the country. And I think that's true of any country. You can read and hear about any country, certainly Saudi Arabia is no exception. But unless you visit in person, you're just not going to have as full picture and a full understanding of the people and the country and what makes this tick and run. But again, I consider that to be a privilege that I've seen it with Americans. And again, I'm yet to travel with an American or hear from an American who makes that long journey to go and to come back and find what divides us. The contrary is true. Everybody that I've traveled with, everybody that I talk to, they go there essentially with the sole purpose of trying to find out what we have in common, as opposed to our differences. And it really doesn't take that long. I think within the first 24 hours, and again, I've been privileged that Americans that I've traveled with often will literally pull me aside, usually after that first 24 hours, and not to thank me, but to say that they're so glad that they came. Because again, they heard and read so much over the years, but just being on the ground is, the phrase that I hear from people is, they call it a game changer. And I think that's true, and that's what I tell all of the young, students that I talk to, is if you have a chance, travel as much as you can. You're gonna always be a better person after whatever country you visited than before you did.
An invitation to all of us to
Please,
Saudi Arabia.
absolutely.
I actually have more questions about geopolitics in
Sure.
the future, but I actually, to be fair, I want to allow our audience to also ask questions, since I have asked all the questions. So let's turn to our audience. We have a woman in the hat, since I don't know your name.
Yes,
Go ahead.
Yes, my name is John L. Menifee with Solar Time USA. Two questions. One, what type of sustainability activities are going on in Saudi Arabia, such as e-mobility infrastructure and renewable energy application?
Sure.
And then in terms of tourism, what's one of the best places in Saudi Arabia do you think some of us should visit? Thank you.
Sure. Karen, do you want to take these questions?
I definitely want to answer that. My answer, and then you can give yours, Fahad, is Al Ula, which is in the north of Saudi Arabia. And it's got these old Nabatean ruins like Petra in Jordan. So you can walk around and, the beautiful sandstone carved tombs and things from the, let's see, the first century or before the first century. But they're really beautiful, and you can take a hot air balloon ride. So that's a lot of fun. And you meet Saudis because the tour guides in much of that area are women. And some of them, have their heads covered. Some of them don't. Some of them have their heads, face, and body covered, but they're wearing abayas, all of the tour guides I saw. But they're women taking people around, showing them things. And in the hotels, young Saudis are working proudly, serving as waitresses or waiters. And Saudis used to refuse to do that kind of work, but they all say they want to be part of Vision 2030. And his whole point is the government is not going to continue to hire everybody. So if you want to earn money, you're going to have to do it yourself, which I'm all for, but Saudis are doing it. So what besides Al Ula, Fahad?
Right, so Saudi Arabia has 8 different UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I know that's one of them, but there's the first Saudi, or the first capital of the first Saudi state called Diriyah, right outside of that I've been to many times, and that's what we're seeing. The old town of my hometown of Jeddah is another UNESCO World Heritage Site, and granted, I'm a little biased, but I think that's a very cool place to see. But there's, very interesting places to see in the north, very interesting places to see in the south of Saudi Arabia. Some of the best diving spots in the world are in Saudi Arabia. I'm not a diver myself. I snorkel, so I stay kind of above, but I do know divers, and they say that there's nothing like it in the world. Your second, or rather your first question about sustainability, we are committed to sustainable development. I think I already mentioned the Saudi Green Initiative. And, we take climate change very seriously, and we're addressing it. I think, as I said in my remarks, we believe that we are leaders in the region because this has to be a collective effort. So, one, we are investing in renewable energy, solar and wind and others. But we're also reducing carbon emissions. We're adopted something called the circular carbon economy. It has 4 R's, and for the lack of, I always forget one of them, but it's basically the objectives is to reduce, reuse, recycle. And sure enough, I forgot the 4th one. But reduce carbon emissions is basically the ultimate objectives. And so we're moving on 2 different tracks. We are generating, I think, more renewable capacity on an annual basis than any other place in the world. And that's out of the belief that I think we all have a responsibility, as a human race, to safeguard the environment and the planet. As far as I can tell, and I know people want to start traveling to other planets and living there, maybe potentially, I don't know, maybe we will one day, maybe we won't, but for the time being, that's the only planet we have. So I think that we all have a responsibility to protect it and protect the environment as well.
Here and then here. Then we'll go back and forth. Go ahead.
Obi Balaj. This is Obi Balaj. Thank you for a wonderful talk and all these points. I have a 2-parter. What are the top 3 challenges that pose a threat to these wonderful efforts Saudi Arabia is pursuing? And for each, what is the most likely solution to overcome that challenge? Now, for these challenges, you can say the ones that are now, or if you predict some in the future, I'm interested both, if you want to cover that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm old enough to know not to make any predictions about anything. Certainly not the trajectory of the Middle East, or sports for that matter, but that's a different issue. But what I will say is what I think I already mentioned it in my remarks. I think it's very important for our goals and some of the goals that we set for ourselves, including being a tourism destination, a logistics hub, that we promote peace and prosperity in the region. We need the region to be more prosperous, more peaceful, and more stable. I believe that Saudi Arabia does more than its fair share to promote peace and stability. We often work very closely with the United States on promoting peace and prosperity and stability. We work with some of our neighbors. And then since you mentioned geopolitics earlier, Ricky, and I think this is, especially given what transpired yesterday in Egypt, I mean, the one conflict that has unfortunately made it almost impossible for the broader region to enjoy any semblance of peace and prosperity and stability is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, Saudi Arabia's policy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been clear and consistent for decades. And in fact, it was the late King Abdullah who, way back in 2002, introduced what is now known as the Arab Peace Initiative. And basically, the initiative offers Israel not just normalization with Saudi Arabia, but normalization with all 21 members of the League of Arab States in return for peace with the Palestinians based on a two-state solution. And, to put it simply, and we're still advocating for a two-state solution. We are leading a global alliance with Sweden, advocating for that. We chaired a conference at the United Nations just a couple of weeks ago. That was chaired by France, again, advocating for a two-state solution and its implementation, and also the recognition of Palestine as a state. As of last count, I believe 160 different countries around the world recognize Palestine as a state, and I think that really says a lot, that there's a broad international consensus that that is the right way forward. And really to just simplify things, and obviously we've all been watching the tragedies that have unfolded over the past 2 years. I don't get engaged with Israelis, neither do my superiors, but I oversee our engagements with the think tank community in Washington, D.C., and a lot of them do travel to Israel. And so I've tried to have an understanding of Israeli thinking. But what was very clear to us and to me is that obviously the attacks of October 7th were horrific and were traumatic for Israelis, I have no doubt. But I think one can argue that to address the traumas of one day is not right to address the traumas of that one day by inflicting daily traumas on Palestinians ever since. Now, having said that, I think that the agreement that was announced yesterday does represent hopefully a new chapter. We welcomed it for sure because we've been advocating for a stoppage of the war in Gaza, for the release of hostages, and also for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. So that's essentially the first stage of President Trump's plan. We welcomed it, we were supportive, but ultimately we just don't see an alternative to a two-state solution. And again, to simplify, it basically offers Israeli security in return for dignity for the Palestinians. And I hope that's not simplifying it too much, but that's the simplest terms I can put it in. So we will continue to work with the United States and some of our neighbors. And again, hopefully yesterday represents a good start and a new start in the right direction.
I think the three biggest challenges for him, he's 40 years old. His father will be 90 in December. So, MBS could rule for another 50 years or so. And that the challenges that these 10 years, he has followed his view that it is better to try many things and succeed and do some of them don't succeed, than to sort of say, I'm going to focus on 3 things and get 3 right. That, you have to have more ambition than that, and he does. But I think jobs, education, and as Fahad said, stability, peace in the region. Unemployment has gone down more than anticipated. It was supposed to the goal was to get to 7% by 2030, and they got to 7% at the end of 2024 or beginning of 2025, or almost to 7%. But there are a lot of Saudis entering the workforce every year, so there needs to be more and more job creation in the private sector. So all of these billions, hundreds of billions and trillions that are being spent on big projects need to produce jobs, as the tourism industry is producing jobs. And he has the ambition that Fahad mentioned of creating a world-class tech sector up in the Neom area, and that requires better education than Saudi Arabia has at this time. And they know that, and they are working on it. And if you talk to the education minister, he has many plans, but that's kind of a generation. It takes a generation to truly change education. And then the most important is the one Fahad mentioned, of peace and stability, because without that, they can't do really any of the other things they want to do well. You know, they have been selected to host the World Cup in 2034. And, you know, that's a huge draw of people, but if there's war in the Middle East, it'll be a lot fewer people that come. So he really does need peace and stability, and I think that's the reason you see Saudi Arabia, both globally and in the region, seeking to improve relations with everyone. Russia, China, their biggest energy consumer, buyer. Russia, which was the first country to recognize the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the U.S., they obviously want to sustain and improve relations with. They have just done a security pact with Pakistan. So he is the Arab and the Islamic leader, and he is seeking to be the global leader by having key relations with all big countries.
A couple more questions. So brief question, and we'll have a brief answer, and then you want to just raise your hand, let Harsha know and bring you a microphone. I'm not sure that I'm doing this. Thank you.
My name is Magdalena Standmeyer. I'm with Georgia State University, Robinson College of Business, and on the notion of education, I wanted to pose the question of how to connect our university with some universities over in Saudi Arabia to have a better understanding, to have cross-cultural projects, communication improvement, and that sort of thing. So I'm opening this for suggestions from you, which universities would be willing to connect with us and perhaps do exchange studies and connecting students to this wonderful technology that we have now, and actually in person perhaps, to have a better understanding and to foster that future of cooperation and knowing each other. Thank you. That was true.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, educational exchanges, cultural exchanges have been a pillar of the relationship for decades. As I mentioned, Saudis have been coming to the United States for education for certainly the past 50 years or so. And I don't have the exact figure, but there's dozens of partnerships between American institutions academic institutions and their counterparts in Saudi Arabia. So I was at Georgia Tech earlier today, where I give a small talk. And I know that Georgia Tech has a number of partnerships with the KAUST, which is the King Abdullah University for Science and Technology. And that's a graduate level school right outside of Jeddah. But some of the other major universities in the kingdom also have partnerships. I know that Harvard, I believe Princeton, Yale are all exploring partnerships. I know for a fact that a number of universities have sent delegations of students to the kingdom to spend an entire week to again get a better understanding of the lay of the land in Saudi Arabia. I had dinner with a delegation from Harvard when they were in Saudi Arabia. There was a delegation from Princeton that I also had the privilege of meeting with. And so these are key relationships. And I also know that Arizona State University, I believe, is going to be the first American institution of higher learning that will be opening a campus in Saudi Arabia. I think starting next year, they're going to have a program that will be run by, I want to say, King Saud University in Riyadh. But ultimately, the idea is to actually open a campus. So I think that's all very positive. And again, academic exchanges, cultural exchanges are critical to the relationship. Because, it's, these young people are the future leaders. And the more time they spend in Saudi Arabia, even if it's a week, but preferably if they spend a couple of years, then they really understand what we're doing, who we are. They certainly would have a greater appreciation for the importance of the relationship. So we're trying to encourage as much of that as possible. Now in Washington, D.C., we have a cultural mission that to some extent oversees, the student community here and helps them with their time in the United States, but they also help connect various institutions to potential partners in the kingdom. So I'd be more than happy to put you in touch with them. And I think to just get that conversation started, and I'm sure they'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
Question here?
Thanks. My name's David James. I wondered if you could say anything about if there's been a change in the relationship between the kingdom and Iran over the last 2 years, especially as their proxies have been untoothed.
Right, thank you. So that's a good question as well. So, Iran is obviously our neighbor, and like I think all of our neighbors, has tremendous potential, has tremendous, not just natural resources, but I think all of our neighbors, I believe, share this tremendous resource in common, which is a young population. That is also the case in Iran, and they have a great history. And so we did have for an extended period of time, we had differences and concerns about Iran's foreign policy. But 2 years ago, we did restore diplomatic relations with them. China played a role in the restoration, but that was essentially a 2-year process to get to that point. The reason we did that is because of, I think, something that I mentioned in my talk earlier. It is out of the belief that maintaining an open channel of dialogue and diplomacy really does serve a purpose. So when you talk to your neighbors, when you talk to nations with which you have differences, and I think that applies to nation states or human beings. If you have a problem with your neighbor, you gotta talk to them about it, right? That's how you resolve it. So I think that, and again, at a very basic level, that same logic applies. So I think Iran understands our concerns and our priorities and our challenges. And so I think we have a good working relationship with them now. We have essentially almost a continuous dialogue with our Iranian counterparts. We want to make sure that they know exactly where we stand on the issues, where we stand in developments. Because in international relations, there's nothing worse, I think, for international relations and diplomacy than uncertainty. But the way to resolve and address that is to have that dialogue going, so to reduce uncertainty, to reduce the risk of misunderstanding. Because again, at a very basic level, you have to have that conversation. You have to let people know what your priorities are, what your challenges are, what your red lines are. Otherwise, it's very easy to miscalculate. And it's one thing for somebody's neighbor to grow a tree when you told them, please don't plant it there. Not that big of a deal. When you're talking about nation states, obviously the stakes are much higher.
I think it's important to say that the government of Saudi Arabia, while doing what Fahad said, it still has its distrust of of Iran. It's important, as you say, to talk, but it doesn't heal all past problems, such as the Iranians striking your Saudi oil facilities in 2019. That was traumatic for the country, and obviously the Crown Prince doesn't want that kind of thing to happen again. So having diplomatic relations with Iran to try to, as Fahad said, lay out your red lines is wise, but it doesn't mean that everyone in the Saudi government now thinks that Iran is a reliable country.
Yeah, thank you, Fahad and Karen, for sharing the insight. You all brought a breath of fresh air, and thank you to World Press Council of Atlanta. These events are fabulous. My question is on ESG. I think you already answered on E pillar and S pillar. And the next question is around the G pillar, where I strongly believe that if you have to lead on ESG, you have to lead first with the G pillar, meaning that you need to have diversity on the boardroom. For example, even if you look in America, half of the population are women, the world's population, still we don't have at the executive level, at the board level, in terms of the number of women that we have. Now, you gave us an interesting statistics around 36%, I believe, the women in Saudi Arabia. So maybe if you can put some color on how the positions of women is at the senior level. Are we at the same level like the United States, or are we better than United States, or anything around that, or from the corporate board governance standpoint?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of words, and I'm sure Karen would like to weigh in on this because she has such a interesting perspective, and she's been going for the kingdom for a long time and has spoken to many women over the years. Right, so I think that we've really come a long way in terms of bridging the gender gap. But there's more work to do for sure. But as we speak, I really can't think of a single sector of the economy where women are not only just participating, but where they're thriving. And again, forgive me if I've already said this, but we have women in every sector of the economy. We have women CEOs, we have women heads of faculty departments, women athletes of every kind. We sent the first Saudi female astronaut into space, into the International Space Station last year, and this was a joint program with an American company here. So all the restrictions that were in the kingdom have largely been removed, and I really think we've made great strides in very little time. We also have equal pay in Saudi Arabia, so if a woman has the same qualifications as a man and can do the same job, then it is expected. It's expected, it's the law, that she gets compensated the same way. So like I said, we've come a long way. We probably still have some work to do. But again, if there's any nation on earth that has completely narrowed or that gender gap doesn't exist, please let me know. We'd love to learn how they did it for sure. Yeah, Karen,
I didn't unfortunately hear the question, but talking about women, I mean, I think, it is very interesting these days that you see groups of women together in restaurants, having a nice time talking. and that kind of, and men around, or you get in an elevator in a government building or a bank or anywhere, and men and women are crowding in the elevator together in a way that, would have been impossible. I mean, I knew some Saudi men in the previous time to MBS and his father who didn't want to be in an elevator if a woman was in it, lest there be any, accusation. I mean, the idea of men and women mixing was not except in someone's home, was not on. And now they do have every job. The head of the stock exchange is a woman who told me that when she began in the financial industry, she was not men who at companies that she called to ask questions to do her financial analysis refused to talk to her. And so she would have to write her questions and have her male colleagues ask them and then give her the information, and she would do her analysis. But she said now she thinks, men, fathers of young women who now have jobs, are very proud to deal with women because they want people to deal with their daughters in the same fashion. It's really, really, women were the better educated sex. And it's very interesting that men in Saudi Arabia now talk about, they have the sense that some American men have that women are out there taking our jobs and being more assertive and successful than we are. I found that conversation when I was there in March interesting because of the echoes in America that one also hears.
We have time for one more question, okay? Kyle? I don't, well.
I can talk, Laura. I'm impressed you know my name. Okay, well, thank you for being here. First of all, I want to unfortunately touch on Jamal Khashoggi, which you briefly mentioned earlier, but I think it deserves more discussion, given that we're talking about Saudi Arabia's growing role in the world, and indeed, the growing investment that's there. So you mentioned briefly that, that might have been an isolated incident. I think there are many people, and Karen could probably speak to this, that would say that that's not the only instance where somebody has been jailed, prisoned, or killed, not just in Saudi Arabia, but worldwide, for criticizing the government. Indeed, that's what Jamal Khashoggi was criticized, right? Was the lack of the ability to criticize the government without fear of reprisal. Here in the United States, we're experiencing that too. So you're right, but that's not the only place that experiences it. But I guess I would love to hear your perspective. First of all, given where things stand now, with the Trump administration, jailing protesters and taking away TV host comedy jobs and things like that. Which country do you think is the United States or Saudi Arabia is more committed to free speech today? How important do you think that is to MBS's reforms and Vision 2030? And what advice would you have for people like me, or just normal citizens of the United States or Saudi Arabia, who are both interested in participating in the future of the global economy, but also want to be able to protect our fundamental freedom to criticize the government without fearing that we'll be jailed, imprisoned, or indeed killed, as Jamal Khashoggi was? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. I will respectfully disagree with you, and I will say that this was an isolated incident. Saudis, as far as I can tell, in our entire history, there is no other incident like it where somebody was killed in this fashion. And like I said, and you can, I invite you to look at our history, read the different accounts. And I say that because I really do think, to a certain extent, so it's been 7 years since the incident. And on some level, I do think, frankly, it's a little unfair to try to define us as a people and as a nation by this one isolated incident, which, as I already acknowledged, was a terrible incident and is a dark chapter in our history. But I really do think it was an aberration. It is not who we are. It's not how we do things. And if you can think of another incident, let me know. We were all shocked when that information came out, because Saudi Arabia and the United States have a lot in common, but we do have different institutions. Our institutions have worked very well for us, in the sense that, and I think Karen, I hope will have time to weigh in on this, because the kingdom has changed dramatically over the years. And, you talked about freedom of expression, and I don't know how closely you follow that development of Saudi media, but I'm old enough to remember when we had 2 TV stations and 3 or 4 newspapers back in the late 70s. We've come a long way from that. And I don't know if you speak Arabic or not, or if you read Arabic or not, but if you do, if you pick up a Saudi newspaper or you put on a Saudi channel of some sort, you're going to see a wide spectrum of views on all sorts of issues. In terms of, transparency, and I'll just give you another example. We publish our annual budget, and the Ministry of Finance has an extensive press conference about the budget every year. And he gets all sorts of questions asked about, additional taxes, additional fees, maybe benchmarks that haven't been met. And he speaks about them with candor. And those journalists show up year after year. Some of them ask the same questions about, why is inflation not lower? Why is unemployment not lower? So I think that perception that, decisions are just made from the top down and they're made in a vacuum is frankly not accurate. We have a consultative, essentially legislator that has the highest number of PhDs in the world. And it's composed of 150 people representing every sector of the economy, every region. And again, they're essentially all subject matter experts that share their views on all sorts of issues. And this body, incidentally, essentially holds hearings of various ministers to talk about the performance of various government ministries, budgetary issues. So like everything else in Saudi Arabia, our political institutions are modifying and shifting and developing to meet, our changing needs over time. I hope you don't mind me asking, have you ever been to Saudi Arabia?
No, sir, not.
Okay, so I do invite you to go.
Thank you.
Again, as I already shared, thousands of Americans live and work in Saudi Arabia. But since your question is essentially about human rights, and I hope I'm not going over time here, but I already mentioned the fact that 14 million non-Saudis live in Saudi Arabia. If we did not respect human rights, if people did not feel safe, they wouldn't stay in Saudi Arabia, because there's some 190 other countries in the world where they can go and live and work. I'm talking about non-Saudis. And in terms of human rights, we respect human rights, and it's kind of at the core of who we are as a people. It is consistent with our faith. It's consistent with our laws. We have, we have dozens of laws that protect the rights of women, that protects the rights of children, that protect the rights of elderly people, people with special needs, people with disabilities. We have a Human Rights Commission that again raises awareness about the importance of respecting human rights and what the laws are, so that, domestic workers, blue-collar workers know what their rights are, but also employers know what their responsibilities are. So we're doing everything that we can. The Human Rights Commission also investigates alleged human rights abuses and violations. So we're doing a lot on that front. And again, at the end of the day, I will add one statistic. I go to the kingdom a lot, and maybe our definition of basic human rights are maybe different than yours in one sense. We have free healthcare and education and housing, or certainly assisted housing. So if you go to Saudi Arabia, and I certainly hope that you do, you're going to find out about the free healthcare, not just the Saudis incidentally, but during COVID, we provided free screening and treatment to anyone who showed up, including people who are in the kingdom illegally. Because we believe that everybody should have access to a good education, everybody should have access to healthcare. And please don't take this as criticism of any nation in the world, but we also do not have homeless people in Saudi Arabia, out of the belief that everybody's entitled to have a roof over their head and, and that they shouldn't go to bed hungry. We have a pretty broad social safety net. The government does. But there's also a nonprofit sector that provides assistance to all sorts of people. If somebody somehow slips through the cracks, through the government programs or through the nonprofit programs, I assure you that a family member is not gonna let a Saudi sleep on the street. And if this person does not have family, then I assure you their neighbor is not gonna let that happen. And I think that says something about who we are, and what we value and what we consider to be basic. Thank you, I appreciate your question, and I do hope that you have a chance to visit the kingdom at some.
I think, yeah, I would just add that I think, free speech is an issue in Saudi Arabia, not so much among Saudis. As I wrote in my book, I think most young Saudis are content to have a good economy and entertainment and leave free speech for the future. But, there are people, there is the Khashoggi incident, as Fahad says, is unique, but there are people who get arrested for things they tweet or for things they say. And at the Formula One race, I think last year or year before, one of the drivers, criticized human rights. I think clearly in Saudi Arabia and, nothing happened, but I think foreigners get more latitude, but I think it could become an issue as the number of international people living in Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's one of my questions. I don't predict it. I'm just curious if over the next 20 years, people will be willing to work and contribute in Saudi Arabia if they, feel they can't. I mean, the need to criticize somebody else's government, I don't think bothers too many people. I don't think that the foreigners I meet, at least, I don't think are eager to criticize the Saudi government. They're more interested in criticizing their own back home. But I think it is. I think the gentleman raised a very interesting and important question. If I were there, I would love to see a show of hands of people who believe that the Khashoggi incident has diminished in the American mind, or is it the same as it was in 2018 or 17? Which year, Fahad, did he? 17? Because my impression is that, as time has passed, that some people see it as a diminished issue, but that for the human rights activists, certainly that it is as alive as it was in the beginning. So if the Crown Prince comes here soon, as I hear he will, I will be curious, to see how people respond to his presence. When he was here in 2018, but before that incident, I mean, he was quite a star as he went from university to university and company to company and dinner with one American media mogul after another. So it will be interesting if he comes soon to see how the difference between those two, or if there is a difference.
Well, on the issue of free speech there, is the Riyadh Comedy Festival going on right now?
I think it just wrapped up.
Just it wrapped up?
And since you mentioned it, and I do get this question, or I think people are somewhat puzzled that we hold a comedy festival or a sporting event or a music festival. And frankly, I find that puzzling myself. And the simple answer is we host comedy events, sporting events, and music events for the same reason that any nation in the world does. For us, it makes perfect sense because it does help us diversify the economy. It generates thousands of jobs. It improves the quality of life. And again, things like music, sports, and comedy have universal appeal. And I'm really not aware of any nation that is in a position to host an international sporting event that doesn't do so. Certainly the United States has for many years, and so have China and France, the UK, Korea, and Japan, and others. And again, for good reason, because for the reasons I just mentioned, but it allows people to come in and to have a better understanding of the people. It allows Saudis to interact with people from all walks of life. And so, whether it's Dave Chappelle doing comedy or Pitbull doing music, sports has always been big in Saudi Arabia. That's not going to change. And so we'll continue to do them. Like I said, hosting the World Cup and excuse the pun is the win-win as far as we're concerned.
Well, they
You're-
also say
Yeah, correct.
You're about to host the WTA women's tennis finals, and I think the men's tennis, no, maybe they're not there this year, but the women's tennis finals are coming up in Saudi Arabia, and all these music festivals. I mean, honestly, music was completely forbidden, and to listen to at the Formula One race, they have a band and people dancing and a DJ, and in every restaurant now there's music. And since I don't hear well, I sometimes wish I could call the religious police back to shut down the music. Not really.
with that, please give a round of applause for our.